Welcome. I'm really pleased that we are having this gathering. We've had people register from right across the country, of course, folks in Ottawa. And this is part of our natural burial initiative. Anne and Judith are both part of the committee the Conservation Burial Ottawa, working hard to bring natural burial to the nation's capital. We are, of course, on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, both historically and in these times. And Ottawa, of course, is home to many Indigenous peoples. And we're very privileged to be here. Again, I was very excited to see people from BC, people from the Maritimes, Quebec, Ontario. We've got lots of people that are very interested in this and interested in hearing from Robyn. Robyn is a PhD candidate in archaeology at the Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador. And she and her husband run the Black Cat Cemetery Preservation. She's been working in archaeology and heritage since 2011, which was after her undergraduate fieldwork in Ireland. And she was drawn to cemetery work, having recorded gravestones in the rain for several weeks in Ireland, which of course, makes me swoon a little bit to think about that. She loves working in gravestone preservation in Newfoundland, exploring parts of the province that many of us would never see otherwise, and connecting with heritage groups in many communities. So I know with our local group, one of the big things that the group has undertaken is identifying the many cemeteries in Ottawa. And if you ask people, they would say like, oh, there's 3 or 4, maybe 5. And our group identified over 90 cemeteries. And some of that work was done through the work of heritage groups. So, this is some of the overlap. And I'm so excited to hear from you, Robyn, because, cemeteries are just rich sites for so many reasons. And so I won't keep talking because I know everybody's here to hear from you. So I'll turn it over, and you can let us know, Robyn, if you're okay for people to interrupt or if we'll just move to questions at the end.
Yeah, probably questions at the end just because I can't see the screens when I have the slides up too.
Great. Okay.
Awesome. Okay, great. Well, thank you for that introduction. I'm very glad that we could finally organize organize ourselves. My schedule has been very silly with grad school. I will share my screen here. Is that working?
Yes. Yeah, can see it.
Excellent. Awesome. Okay. Well, there we go. Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us today, and also for people in the future watching this as a recording. Hello. I will say as I start that I'm speaking today from Portugal Cove in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm on the ancestral homeland of the Beothuk on the island of Newfoundland, which is also the ancestral homeland of the Mi'kmaq people as well, and presently. I'd also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatsiavut, and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original peoples of Labrador. My work in cemetery research recognizes that historic burial grounds specifically were established through colonialism by settlers on these traditional territories. There is no graveyard in this picture, but it is in Greenspond, Newfoundland, which is an island I never would have ever seen had it not been for this kind of research. And this is a view out of their city hall. We were having a town meeting about their sites, which it's a very remote town today, but previously it was like a hub if you were going down the coast on a boat, and there is every denomination of like version of Christianity there, and it's amazing. Yeah, so as you said, I'm Robyn. I'm a historic archaeologist. I'm in the hopefully final few months of my PhD. My dissertation is in the hands of administration at the moment, going into examination. My research looks at historic burial grounds, as is probably obvious, gravestone conservation and colonial burial practices in the 17th century. Specifically, my research is on 17th century landscape development and with burial spaces in mind, and how early settlements were organized, British, Dutch, and French as comparison, how they were establishing their living spaces and their death spaces in sort of congruency with one another. I have a book coming out this fall about protective marks on gravestones as part of like mortuary art. This symbol specifically, this little hex foil, that's coming out in September. If anyone's interested, I can give you more information about that at the end. And this is pictures of me and my husband doing some field work in Newfoundland. So as you probably already know, if you've been around historic cemeteries, it can often be a little dangerous. Often older markers have areas that have degraded or are a little unstable. So I never recommend, if you're in a historic cemetery, leaning on the gravestones. There's a very dramatic picture there from the Howth burial ground in Scotland, in Dundee, where there's children pushing on an angel and one's about to get crushed by it. And I always like to include that picture because it's very dramatic. But there's also a photo of me working in Woodland Cemetery in London, Ontario. And this cross, which is both of the other photos showing the inside of it as well, was right next to this really prominent obelisk that was a site that people used to come visit when I was working at this cemetery. And if you touched it, that thing could have fallen over because it had an iron pin on the inside that had completely degraded. And at some point it had been reset with monument compound, which only lasts about a decade. So like we had to completely take it down for safety reasons. So there's always those things to consider, especially if you're in like a high traffic area with more historic stones. Gravestone conservation is obviously what I'm here to talk about. Historic burial grounds around the world face a lot of challenges regarding their preservation and conservation. The thing I always tell heritage groups is that stone has a lifespan, and we think of grave monuments of any kind really as being sort of this eternal memorial to people that are gone. But as you're working in green burials, you'll know that things are not permanent, and that's sort of how they're supposed to be. And so I always like to remind people that like even the stones themselves have a lifespan. They're not going to be there forever. So doing the conservation work on them, all we can really do is slow down the natural process and clean them and like keep them looking okay. But they can never be returned 100% to what they looked like originally. And that's not the goal. They are artifacts and documents and pieces of art, and we're just trying to keep them around a bit longer so more people can enjoy them and learn from them. But yeah, eventually they are all going to crumble. There's nothing really we can do about that except to bring them all inside. But then what's the they sort of lose a lot of context there. These are just some photos of damage I can't fix. Weed whackers and lawnmowers leave really distinctive marks on them, and you can tell if it's a weed whacker or whippersnapper if it's got those like flicking up and down lines on it on the edges of stones versus the lines going all the way across the bottom from lawnmowers. So next time you're in a site where people mow the lawn a lot, you can see exactly what damage was done. And unfortunately, it is taking off the parts of the surface of the stone, which people will be like, there's scratches. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. There's now scratches forever, which is unfortunate, but it's kind of interesting to be able to tell that as well. Oh, I took out a slide. Okay. Yeah, I also wanted to point out what it says here. Information on up-to-date conservation techniques is often not readily available to people, which is why we like to do a lot of work with community groups, making sure that up-to-date information on like gravestone cleaning and repair and like what to do and what not to do is as available as I can make it personally. Because when you Google like how to clean a gravestone, there is information out there that is very outdated and that we now know does a lot of damage. And stuff like gravestone rubbings and materials to make the text more obvious, we now know can harm it in the long run. So I'll be talking a little bit about those what not to do's and what to do's later as well. So these are some basic types of weathering that you'll see on gravestones and historic sites. All of my examples are going to be for historic sites. So like we'll take granite and we'll put it off to the side because it didn't really come around to the late 19th century, and it's what's my screen doing? There we go. It's very durable, and we don't really have as many erosion problems with it. But the three types of weathering that you see on softer monuments like sandstone, limestones, and what's the other one? Sandstone, limestones, marble. My brain is melted at my ears at this point in the day. But yeah, so geologically, the three types of weathering that you'll see are chemical, physical, and biological weathering. When you see specifically marble gravestones that have sort of that black staining on them, that's typically the result of a chemical weathering from just rain. You see it a lot more in industrial areas caused by the acid rain. And iron staining as well is sort of a chemical weathering process from if they have an iron pin in it or something leaning against it, that can also affect the stone. I don't have a photo of it specifically, but you can see the darkening on the surface of these ones. Um, Physical weathering is caused by processes like freeze thaw, which cause the stone to expand and contract. That will happen naturally and cause cracks to happen in the stone, but in cemeteries specifically, it can be exacerbated by like sprinklers. If you're in a place that gets really warm, like Ottawa, and some of these examples are, I think, all from London, Ontario. If it gets really hot and a really cold sprinkler hits it at the like height of the day, that can cause cracks even in granite because it's that very fast change in temperature. So that's something that we always try and make sure people are aware of with sprinklers in more modern sites. But it can happen in the winter too, just like with freeze thaw in general. And that's because the water is temperature changes, water can get in the cracks, the freeze, it expands, the normal things like that. And then biological weathering is the biggest issue that we can actually do something about. Chemical weathering you can kind of clean, that's fine. Physical weathering, it's going to happen. Biological weathering is from lichens and mosses, vines if they are an issue in your area, roots as well. And you can see in this very narrow photo here, there's cracks in the stone, but there's also like there's roots in there. I don't know if they're really, really visible, but there was roots inside of that stone. So what happens is these stones, specifically marble, have a very high calcium carbonate content. So when there's a plant that's attached to it, it's attached by eating into the surface of the stone and eating that calcium in the minerals of the stone itself. So they can actually like go inside and create cracks. And when you pull them off, like just rip them off the surface, and it's particularly an issue with vines, it'll pull pieces of the stone off with it. So there's a lot of care that has to be taken from removing biological material from stone surfaces as well. The photo on the right is a good example of physical weathering. The entire face of that sandstone monument has sheared off. That one was from Durham, Connecticut, I believe. And there were many examples of the sandstone there having just like cleaved the inscription off completely, which was wild to see. And then there's another example of chemical weathering on the left here where it almost looks like, and you see this mostly in sandstone for whatever reason, if it's makeup, where it'll look like the letters are almost melting because of their contact with acid rain, which is really interesting as well. Yeah. So these are some typical sort of how a gravestone exists. Different parts of gravestones. The most common type of gravestone you'll see in a historic cemetery is what I usually call tablet markers. So it's like your stereotypical grave marker, just like one piece of stone sticking out of the ground. That is the stereotypical grave marker. But those are held up in two different ways. They either have like the sort of orangish looking stone there to Eliza, they extend at least a foot or more below the surface of the ground so that they can cantilever. And like if they start leaning, these are the ones you'll see leaning really, really hard because they have that weight underground to hold them in place. But the other kind of stone, which is the slightly more modern version, which I really dislike working on because it's so heavy. It's a key or base. They're often made of sandstone because it's softer and cheaper. And it's like this gigantic block of stone with a slot in it. And the gravestone itself will either be set directly into it or like Ida Grace's stone here have like a notch in the bottom that sits into that base. And then that's attached in place with, we use a lime mortar so that it's reversible. But when those ones start leaning, there's almost nothing to hold them in place anymore. So they've got like this inch, maybe 2 inches of stone, and they'll either break off partway up because of the pressure of the weight of the stone itself leaning, or they'll just fall out of the base, and then the base will sink, and then I have to move it, and they weigh a lot. So for me, it's way nicer when you get these older style stones that don't have the key like at all, because you can just sort of dig out the bottom and straighten them up, and it's much nicer to deal with. So I appreciate that style a lot. And then you also get complex monuments that you're probably familiar with in many cemeteries where people had money, and they will be made of multiple pieces. They're not all like a little tablet. They often slot together. That one we repaired in Ontario with a crane because it came in several pieces. And those ones are typically made of marble or granite that you'll see most of the time. My lights just flickered. Yeah, so those are the basic parts of a historic gravestone. Ida Grace's stone is stunning. This was when I was working at the Woodland Cemetery in London, Ontario, and it was completely buried. So we found it by probing the ground. And because it was buried, it was not exposed to any pollution from the atmosphere. So when we cleaned the soil off of it, it had very minimal staining, and I could not even get a photo of it where it wasn't like glowing. It was so white. That one almost was returned to its original state, and we had a new key made for it, which was really lovely. And I lost my mouse. Here we go. And if you're familiar with 19th century gravestone art at all, I didn't include anything older because this is what you're most likely going to see in historic cemeteries. Older stuff is what I look at for my dissertation, and so like 17th and 18th century imagery, and that's where you get sort of the death's head with the wings, and the hourglass also with wings, and figures of death with a scythe, and the like scales, and all the sort of more morbid imagery, which is very 17th, 18th century, and it's the memento mori, the reminders of death. So they want you, when you were standing in front of their gravestone, sometimes they literally said it, they wanted to remind people that like, hey, you're in front of my grave, and that's cool that you're coming to visit me, but your time's next. You're going to be in the ground here pretty soon. So they're like, literally like, remember me as I am now, so shall you be, etc. But in the 19th century, we saw a softening of the image of death. And people were, instead of saying, here lies the literal body of, they were like, in memory of, the stone erected to, the idea of sleeping versus like a corpse in the ground, which I've seen some very dramatic statements on older gravestones. So for 19th century imagery, we have an assortment here. These are also from Ontario, but they're pretty general across the sort of like Western world. We've got the Masonic symbols with the square and the eye of God. We've got a Bible that I can't read in this photo, and some flowers, the holding, very typical like biblical imagery, holding open Bibles and stuff. Broken flowers, we've got 2 examples here, and that's a really standard image as well, typically for like someone died in their prime. That's sort of the idea that like, oh, they were this blossom was cut down before it had faded. But this one was really interesting because it is a thistle rather than a flower, and this person was of Scottish heritage. So that was a really cool thing that they included in there as well. The weeping willow is a very classical imagery. Often weeping willows will have other classical imagery associated with them, like urns and stuff, which is kind of fun because they weren't cremating people at that time, but they're like, here's a classical Greek vase and an urn, and it's very dramatic and poetic, which I love. We have the clasped hands, which is my favorite 19th century imagery, and it's supposed to be sort of a final farewell between 2 people, either literally or metaphorically, but very often, and on this example, you can kind of see this like lacy sleeve going on one side, and sort of a more like typical men's suit sleeve or shirt sleeve. So those ones are often like the final farewell between a husband and wife. Gone home, pointing up, classic. You also sometimes, not as frequently, get a hand just pointing down, which is quite dramatic and fun. And we're like, are they just pointing at the body? Are they pointing at like hell? It's fun to imagine that one. And then of course the lamb, which is very like Lamb of God, but also typically used for children's graves, which people are often familiar with as well. Yes, okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some projects that I've worked on in Newfoundland with Black Cat Cemetery Preservation, and sort of what we did for them before and after pictures, and hopefully the sound works because I have a couple little videos in here as well. So this is Green's Pond, which I highly recommend people come visit if anyone's in Newfoundland and you feel like driving 4 hours away from St. John's up to the middle of nowhere. There's this gorgeous community called Green's Pond, and they're lovely up there, and they have 8 historic cemeteries. 6 of them have gravestones that you can see, and there's 200 and something gravestones there that need work. So this is an ongoing project with the Historical Society there. So we went out there a couple years ago and did a preliminary survey with the Historical Society, went around to all of their cemeteries and basically took stock of every gravestone that needed work done and compiled a big report for them. And then because it's a community project and fundraising for heritages for everyone and for cemetery stuff is very slow and hard to find money for, as with most community projects, unfortunately. So this one, we go out for a couple days at a time, basically. We'll do like 10 or 20 gravestones and we'll come back again in a couple months when they have gathered a little bit more money from their fundraising channels. So this was the stone of Stephen Peckford. It was made of something very interesting. It wasn't concrete, but it sort of seemed like a composite material that was molded, or it was just a really strange stone. But luckily the key and the actual marker stayed together and it had just fallen over. Greens Pond has very little topsoil, and they are notorious for building these gigantic, because they can't really sink a base into the ground, they make these like blocks of concrete to put their gravestones on. And unfortunately, if you know anything about Newfoundland, it's constantly raining here. It's probably raining right now. It was earlier. So concrete doesn't really last that long, especially when you fill it with gigantic aggregates like these ones. And it sort of just starts spalling apart. You can see the different pieces of concrete that have all just come apart from there. So a lot of the work we do in Greens Pond is removing concrete and laying a foundation that's a little bit more stable. So what we typically do is remove whatever rotting pile of concrete they had underneath the gravestone, and we put in crusher dust, or it's also called Class A, or sometimes people call it pea gravel, but that's not quite. Crusher dust is like the very fine angular pieces of stone that you would use when you're laying like patio stones and stuff like that. And we make sure it's all level and tamped down. And what that does is provide a bit of stability, more stability than the soil would for the grave marker, and also drainage. So when it's sitting on that, rather than concrete, which pools water and doesn't allow for water to move, which is not what you want when you're trying to keep an old stone together that's softer than the concrete, we replace it with something that's more permeable. And there's also a mesh sort of, it's called monugrid, and it sort of looks like a honeycomb, and you can use that to replace concrete foundations they use them under columbariums. They've used them in London as well under columbariums. And we use that under larger markers, but for this one we just used crusher dust, and then you put the monument back on, add more around it for stability and tamp that down, and then my husband's very good at the landscaping, so he puts all the sod back so we can try to make it look like we didn't just dig a gigantic hole in the middle of the graveyard. Yeah, so this was after we cleaned it. It has some staining from the moss being on top of it and growing there, but that will lighten as well. When we clean grave markers, we use really soft brushes made of either like a soft plastic or Tampico, like a natural fiber. You never want to touch them with anything metal, basically. And we use water at first, and then D2 biological solutions, which is a non-ionic cleaner that is pH neutral, so it doesn't deposit any acids or salts into the surface of the stone. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but yeah, D2 is like the sort of, it's not really much of an industry, but the industry standard. And it was developed for historic stone conservation. And this was like 4 feet away from Peckford's stone. This was another monument in Greens Pond that had sort of toppled off the big pile of concrete that it had been sitting on. But the concrete itself was actually in really good condition because it wasn't as exposed to the elements. So we were able to sort of reset that back up on top of that and use an epoxy that is weather resistant and temperature resistant, and made for this kind of work, for stonework, to put those pieces back together. And this one was really, really flush. It was really well made, and really well preserved, other than the fact that it had fallen over. But usually when there's big gaps, when we do a break repair, I would fill those in with pointing mortar. So just like 100% lime mortar, because what we're trying to do is make sure that moisture can escape from the stones. You don't want to do any restoration work where you put concrete or Portland cement, even though people will tell you that Portland cement is fine. It is not fine. What it is that it's harder than the material that you're putting it on, and it is not water permeable at all. So what happens when you put concrete around a gravestone, it happens a lot in Ontario, where they'll take historic markers and they'll put them in like a wall of concrete. What that does is traps moisture inside the stone itself. It becomes this like sponge because it has nowhere else to get out of. So it sits inside the stone and makes it softer, and it makes it more susceptible to weathering. So we really try and discourage anyone I talk to at all, that you should avoid using concrete in any form, with gravestones, except, and I think it's in here, if you're making a new key for a stone, but then you make it and then it's completely dry before it even touches the stone, so that part is reversible. It's my tirade against concrete, which I think could be an entire lecture in itself. This is our most recent work in Greens Pond, and we're actually going back in July this year, which I'm really excited about. This was a family plot for the, oh, I can't read it. Lang family, there we go. And all of these monuments were, again, on gigantic, you can't really see them, but pillars of concrete that we spent like a day and a half removing. All of these markers had toppled over. The pins were not iron. They were brass, I think. You can sort of, they're kind of green. So we didn't actually end up leaving those in place, but we used our stone epoxy to reattach them rather than relying on those pins. Pinning used to be a really standard way of doing monument conservation, but the last couple of years, people have moved away from it because there's the chance that you could damage the stone further if you're drilling into it. And also you're removing material from a historic artifact, basically. And that's really sort of counterintuitive to the conserving it in its current state. But yeah, so there were 4 of these gorgeous, complex monuments in this plot. And then the farthest one, the little pointy-topped obelisk fellow, had fallen on top of, you can just kind of see in the corner of the right-hand picture there, this like piece on the ground. And what we found underneath this monument was a gigantic marble ledger to the first member of this family who had arrived in Greens Pond from Scotland. And I don't know why I don't have a picture of it in here. I keep meaning to get it off my phone. But it was this stunning monument that no one in the town knew had been there because it had sunken. And Greens Pond, with its very low amount of topsoil, it's like right on the edge. There's nothing between it and the rest of the Atlantic Ocean. The topsoil sort of blows away, and then the graves are really close to the surface. So this monument had sunk a bit, there were some bones on the end. So we had to sort of put those back. That happens a lot. Another thing I always like to say is that my husband and I are both archaeologists, and we are able to hold archaeology permits to do work in sites like this. And if you are ever doing work or want to do work in a historic cemetery, you need to find out if you need to have an archaeological permit to be there or get an archaeologist to be with you, and obviously get permission from the site management and everything. Yeah, so a lot of these sites that we're working on require an archaeology permit to be there. Oh, okay, I have a video. We'll see if the sound works. Well, I've got subtitles at least.
No cubby.
That was in, I think, early June last year. And we were like, it's warm enough in town to do our work. Town is St. John's. So we went to Greens Pond, which is 4 hours away in north. And it was 2 degrees, and there were icebergs just off the island, which were making it colder. And the stone epoxies don't set if it's below 10 degrees consistently. So we had to half do a lot of work and then come back and do it later in the summer when it had actually warmed up. And it's also not a good idea to clean gravestones if it's going to be freezing overnight. Because just like using the cleaner and then having it freeze immediately isn't as good for the stone as we try to do. Yeah, this is the George Vardy gravestone. This was one of the first projects we did in Newfoundland in 2021, and I'm still very happy with it, so I keep showing it to people. This stone was leaning up against a tree, and so it has all this pitch on it. So we spent 2 days picking pitch off of it with little bamboo skewers. And bamboo skewers are really great to use if you are cleaning a gravestone because they are very, very soft. So you will wear them down before you can wear the stone down or scratch them, like scratch the stone. So they're really nice to use for restoration work, and they're really cheap, which is helpful. This stone was the grave marker of George Vardy, who was a teacher in the community of Little Heart's Ease. And he lived in this area called Clay Pits, which is where this burial ground was, which is completely surrounded by blueberries. Awesome. And he, every day to teach, he would hike over the mountain. There was a path, there was a mountain between him and the community up this peninsula, and he would hike up there every day. And so the community was really excited to get his gravestone put back up. Unfortunately, it had fallen, broken, and then moved up against the tree, so nobody actually knew where it was supposed to be in the burial site. So we just sort of, with consultation with the Heritage Society, made our best guess of where it should go, sort of close to where they think it had fallen down. And for this one, we did make a new base out of concrete, but it is completely set before the gravestone goes into it. So we brought it to site on another trip, and we attached it to the base using lime mortar again, so that there's no area for water to pool in there. So when you set them directly into the bases like that, which sometimes happen, people just like pour a block and jam it in. And that creates a weak point with the water, like not being able to get away from the bottom of the stone. And then you'll see a lot of them snapping right at the bottom, which is really difficult to repair because there's nowhere to put clamps to reattach it. So it involves a lot of chiseling. But this one, every time I talk to the people who are part of this Heritage Society, they come to talks in St. John's and stuff. And whenever I see any of them, they're like, oh, the stone's still standing. I'm like, oh, I'm so happy. And yeah, that one turned out beautifully. And there's still some staining from the pitch, but it is way better looking. And a really nice thing of the D2 product as well, if you're doing gravestone cleaning with it, is that it cleans sort of the biological material and staining that's on the surface. You can't get all of it off, but it cleans it pretty well. But what it does is it sits in the pores of the stone, like water would, and sort of inhibits further staining or biological growth for several years. So it's really nice to just, like, it keeps working and lightening the stone and cleaning it for you, which is very, very helpful, while also being non-toxic. I should work for them. I should be their spokesperson at this point. And this is another little video we put together of the process of fixing George Vardy's gravestone with no sound. They're very ad hoc concrete mixing. This was the first time that we made a base because it doesn't, usually they're just sunken, but this one, because we didn't know where it had come from on the site, we had to completely make a new one for it. And it's Newfoundland, so our client was like, just take my 4x4, it's in the shed, I'll leave you the keys. Like, it was beautiful. So then we got it all situated in the ground. Another issue with grave markers in Newfoundland is that people like to paint them a lot. especially marble ones. They get completely covered in white paint, and it's the same issue as concrete. Basically, it's sort of paint is not water solid, or not porous at all. So water can't move through it. So water just gets stuck inside of it, and then it starts swelling from the inside. Um, and it's very, very difficult to get paint off. Even if it's water-based paint, like you can only pick off so much. And unfortunately, there's no conservation safe paint strippers. And I have friends that work in buildings conservation in different parts of Canada, and they've like consulted with their bosses for me because we're like, surely there has to be something somewhere. But no, there's no very safe way, especially for something as thin as, like, if it was a building, you can do a bit more pressure to it. But a gravestone is so little in comparison that there's no really safe way to strip paint off of it without removing the surface of the stone as well. So that's unfortunately something to avoid. So in city environments, when they get vandalized, there's often not a lot we can do. Okay. And this is the Trinity St. Paul's Churchyard project, which is our favorite thing ever. This was a really amazing community archaeology project because we have been in contact with them for several years while they got funding, while they sort of Ian Morris is standing in front of it in that photo, but there's a war memorial there that I consulted on its restoration before we even moved back to Newfoundland from Ontario. And so we've been working with them for a while, and then we were asked to do a site visit in, I think, 2021, and sort of take stock of what was wrong with this site and what needed doing, and what the goals of the community group that are in charge of the Trinity Historical Society, what their goals for the site were, which was restoration of the site while retaining its heritage characteristics. So if stones were only leaning about like a 10% grade, they weren't in danger of falling over, they weren't putting stress on the stone. We left them in place because they were worried that if we straightened every single gravestone, it would almost look fake. It would look like a manufactured heritage landscape. So we wanted to sort of keep some of that characteristic. There's some stones that are like a little bit crooked, and that kind of like keeps the charm going on this site. Trinity Church, the St. Paul's Churchyard is I think it's the third church on the site. The first one being in the 1720s, I believe, or 1740s. It's a very old site. And there were burials there before the first church was built. And that's what really common in Newfoundland for historic burial grounds, because there weren't any established clergy in Newfoundland until like the mid-19th century. What you'd often find was people creating a community burial ground for themselves that was unconsecrated. But when churches were established, they would often put them near the place that people were already using as their burial ground, and then later consecrate that ground. So this one is a churchyard, but I would also call it a burial ground in the sense that it was not originally associated with a church, which is very cool. And also, like all historic burial grounds, this one is sort of a mound because of the 300 years of burial history here. We restored 188 gravestones at the site. Those are all the known stones at the site, and there are records of about 2,000 burials here. And those records do not go back as far as they know there are burials happening here. They only have the records for so long, but they know it was in use before that. So that was really interesting. And there were instances in this project as well, because it has had such a long history, that we were calling the provincial archaeology office because human remains were coming out of the ground, and we're like, what do we do here? And they're like, you're in the graveyard, put them back. And this was another site that we were under permit to be on. So this was all, it was all okay to be there. Most of the gravestones in Trinity are made of limestone, which is really interesting for Newfoundland because there are no limestone quarries in this part of the province at the very least. So it wasn't something that was being used locally for gravestones. But there were very strong trade routes with Ireland and with the west coast of England in the 1700s. 18th century. So most of the gravestones from that period, there were no established gravestone carvers in Newfoundland at that time, which is very strange. It's literally called the Rock, but no one had set up shop carving gravestones as a profession at that point. So they were getting their gravestones shipped over from the British Isles. So all of the limestone that you can see in this picture was all brought over by wealthy merchants who could afford to do so. And that was really nice. And these, you can maybe tell by the way that these stones are leaning that they do not have a gigantic quay underground as well. So we had a great time working at this site. Not too many headaches to deal with. And it looked so different when we were finished, because this is the before picture. We did a lot of work raising gravestones with tripods. We have a tripod with a 1-ton hoist. The first year we did gravestone restoration, we did not have that, and we were lifting stones by hand. And that is not a fun thing to do. I do not recommend it. So we got a hoist and a tripod set up, and that's made our lives so much easier and also safer. So that's a photo of me on the left there, digging out a new base area for the gravestone, and we'll do this thing where we put the gravel in the ground and tamp it down, make sure it's all level, and then reset the stone and put gravel around it. In the middle is Stephen Crocker's gravestone, which was one of the last ones we worked on. It's very ornate. This one is marble, and it was carved in St. John's. The gravestone carvers in St. John's set up around, I want to say, the 1820s. We started seeing shops opening and local gravestones being carved, but they were still quite often importing marble from Vermont, probably, and sandstones from Nova Scotia. They weren't using local stone, which is really interesting. There is one gravestone in this site that is got an inscription on it that's actually carved from like a local slate material, which was very interesting to see, but it was like a prestige thing to get them brought in. This one has clamps on it because it had broken partway up, and we had repaired it with stone epoxy. And then the other option for repairing gravestones is to just leave them on the ground. And this we do if the breaks in the stone are too degraded to safely put back together, like the epoxy won't do anything because they're just crumbling. Or if the bottom of the stone is missing, if it's broken off and has gone, and you could repair it and set it back in the ground, but it would cover part of the inscription. So we often ask the people we're working with, like, what they want to do. Do they want to see the whole inscription, or do they want to see it standing again, because you'll lose part of that. In that case, we would record all of the inscription before it gets partially buried. In this case, the stone was left on the ground, but again, we took it out of the ground first and gave it a bed of gravel underneath, like a couple inches deep, so it had that support from sinking back into the soil as quickly, and also had some drainage underneath it. And for these ones, we typically don't put them level on the ground. We'll put them at a little bit of an angle so that water can run off of them, because that can also be a problem. A little video, trying to be cognizant of the time. When you're removing lichen from a stone, and I think somewhere in the later slides here, I have said that you should do it dry, but that I don't know why that's on there, because that's not true. It's really good to, if you're removing lichen, to soak the whole stone first, just so that the material is really soft, and then you scrape it off rather than pull. So if there's any like roots of moss or roots of lichen or anything like stuck in the stone, it gets cut rather than pulled. And that's really good for restoring the stone. And that stone is way brighter now. We cleaned that 2 years ago, and that was the first pass at cleaning. And it is now even brighter from the D2, just like doing its magic. So there's a little before and after of part of the churchyard, a little bit different looking. It was pretty funny as well when there were stones that were completely on the ground that we put back up, because there's no grass where they were laying. So when we put them back up, it kind of looked like a fresh grave had just been dug, which must have been very interesting for people walking by to see. But yeah, Trinity's stunning. It was the first historical like heritage district that was established in Newfoundland and Labrador. So they have taken very, very good care of their historic core of the community. It's like a jewel, a jewel of heritage in the province to visit. I think this is okay. Last little example of a restoration work. And I really like to include this one. This is in Heart's Content, Newfoundland. If you've heard of these towns, they've got great names. There's Heart's Content, Heart's Delight, and Little Heart's Ease, really close to each other. Those are great names. This stone was a grandparent or great-grandparent of another grad student in the archaeology department, actually. And his family lived out around this area. And it's really special because he has a photo of the fellow on the gravestone and his wife, who was buried nearby. And it was really cool because we never get to see images of the people's gravestones that we work on. So he was like, can I meet you on site? And then he brought this photo from his parents' house so we could actually see the faces of the people whose gravestone we were working on. So it was really, really lovely. And he gave us permission to share this photo all the time. And then this one was also reset into a concrete base at one point. And then the other issue with concrete is that it's really heavy. And like you think putting a gigantic heavy thing to hold up a stone is helpful, and it is, but it does also pull the stone down faster because of that extra weight. So this one had a base and then a huge, bigger base attached to the bottom, and we broke a shovel getting it out of the ground because it was so gigantic. But now it's all reset and lovely. And there was some areas of loss near the bottom from when it broke, so we refilled that with lime mortar as well, so it had a smoother face on it. Okay, so some gravestone cleaning restoration do's. If a gravestone is laying on the ground and you happen to be cleaning it, I always recommend using a soft, dry brush to just gently sweep any debris off the surface. Because if you're scrubbing at it and trying to clean it and there's rocks that get stuck in your brush, they could scratch the surface of the stone. I need to change this because it's not it's not dry. It should be wet biological material. Yeah, for larger plants like ivy, you want to cut them at the base. And I don't know how much of an issue this would be in your area, but you cut them at the base and wait for the plant to die, and then you can scrape it off so you don't pull the roots out, and then they'll eventually fall out on their own. But yeah, you wet the surface of the stone using a very like a dull wooden spatula or like a really soft plastic like a paint scraper, and you can just scrape the surface of the stone, and those will wear down faster than the stone as well. And then you can clean the surface with plastic or natural bristles, just with water to start with. If you don't want to buy D2, it is quite expensive. And that'll do quite a lot to get debris and material off the face of the stone. And then we usually do a 1-to-1 ratio of water and D2 biological solution on the surface of the stone. You don't even have to actually scrub it. It's just a little bit faster. You can just spray it on the surface and leave it there. And then it'll do its own thing after a while. But if you want to see some results immediately, you can sort of spray it on, give it a little scrub. It does turn orange when it's activated, and it's like that means it's like eating away at the gross little biological bits in the stone. But no one told me that the first time I used it on a very important monument in London, and the stone turned like pinky orange, and we're like, oh my god, we just ruined everything. But no, that means it's working, and that goes away once it dries. But I would like to give that warning because they don't on the bottle tell you that it's going to do that. And that's sort of the basics of gravestone cleaning. And then the don'ts are the longer list, of course. Never use a metal tool on a gravestone surface. Wire brushes, I see that sometimes, like people use a wire brush to try and clean debris off, but that takes off the surface of the stone as well, so I really don't advise that. The biggest one that people always ask me about is rubbings of gravestones. That used to be something that was really popular. It was something that people did all the time. I have a book about it from the 70s that's like, here's how you tape stuff to a gravestone. I'm like, oh God. But what we know now is that repeated rubbings on gravestones, and even just doing it once, the pressure on the stone, especially if it's something softer, will dislodge little particulates of the stone, and eventually that'll speed up the weathering. It takes away that like hard surface, and it'll make it dissolve faster, basically. There's a really good example of the Katrina Van Tassel gravestone in Sleepy Hollow, New York, which was the namesake of the character in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Because her gravestone is so famous, it has had a lot of gravestone rubbings, and I saw it last year. You can almost not see the inscription anymore because of the repeated rubbings. The face of the stone has degraded. I should put a picture of that in here because it's quite dramatic and you can't really read it anymore, unfortunately, but that's why that happened to it. So I really dissuade people from doing rubbings anymore. For cleaning products, water, if you have no access to D2 only. Using household cleaners like soap or bleach Because they're not pH neutral, they can deposit salts and acids into the surface of the stone. And when those sit in there and then they get like wet again, they can expand and crack the stone from the inside. And the same thing with when people put sometimes like baby powder or shaving cream or flour over the surface of the stone to try and read the inscription better. It does the same thing. It sits in the pores of the stone, even if it looks like it's all been cleaned off with water, and it can expand from the inside and crack the face of the stone off, which isn't great. Isn't great for preservation. The photos here, the top stone is a limestone marker from Wales, and all the pitting on it was caused by the vines being pulled off the surface. So it is no longer legible. And then the bottom piece here is a wall, not a gravestone, but it's a really good example of what happens when you fill stuff in with concrete when it should be something more breathable, like lime mortar. Mortar would have been originally what was used for building all these gigantic buildings in Europe that are still standing after 1,000 years. But when the mortar started coming out over the last bunch of decades, people were replacing it with concrete because it was quicker and cheaper. But then you start getting these stones that look like they've got a bunch of holes in them because the water has nowhere to go. Normally it goes to the softest, easiest, most permeable area, which would be the mortar. And the mortar would start coming out. And then after like 100 years, you have to repoint your wall, but you don't have to take your wall down. But when you put concrete around it, the wall itself starts degrading and you have to start replacing entire blocks. Like you can see that brand new one. And that's something that the last decade conservation has sort of realized was happening, and people have switched their gears completely and they're like, do not put concrete on historic stonework. Yeah, so that's really nice to see. Also, this one's probably a given, but power washers and sandblasters should not go near your historic gravestones. They will make it look very pretty, but it will also remove the surface of the stone and they will fall apart faster. And I mean, I don't have to repeat 7, I've been saying it the whole time. But yeah, those are the basic don'ts of gravestone cleaning. Yeah, so that is the talk. And if people have questions, I would love to try and help answer them for you. I'll leave that slide up for a sec in case anyone needs to email me.
That was great, Robyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you leave this up for a minute, if people want to take down your information, I can also email people with your contact info if they get it in time tonight. Do you want me, I can't see folks right now, but do you want me to call out names, or are you able, do you want to just, if people put up their hands or ask questions?
Yeah, people can just jump in. I don't mind.
Okay, I see Judith has her hand up.
Hello.
Thanks. Found it really, really interesting. I have 4 quick comments. I studied archaeology some 60 years ago.
Amazing.
And one of the cleverest studies that I still think was one of the cleverest studies was he studied gravestones in New England. And what he wanted to find out was, can archaeologists, when they are talking about the development of art, are they accurate in terms of the date as the development and of the art? And so what he did was take pictures of gravestones in New England and take out the dates.
Mm-hmm.
And he showed them to archaeologists and asked them, put these in order. And then he could tell if they were right or not because he had the dates. And he found that most archaeologists were very good at figuring out what the sequence was as it became more complicated and then less complicated, and therefore you could trust them to do it for things that you didn't have validation of the dates. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was brilliant.
Was that James Dietz by any chance?
Probably.
It sounds like something he would do.
Yeah. I ended up not going into archaeology because 60 years ago, my professor said, "Oh, a girl can't do that. You wouldn't be
Oh,
able to lead a dig." And
oh, that's
believed
awful.
him. And anyhow,
He
uh,
was wrong.
yeah. And, I mean, I don't know if he was wrong then. He is certainly. It's certainly something that I wish I had pursued more.
Mhm.
Um, the second one is that I went out to a local cemetery with someone and a local, I'm in Ottawa, and she was very distressed because her mother's tombstone had a bit of an orange mold on it.
Mhm.
And so she would come out with bleach and she kept trying to clean it off. And I contacted a local um, biologist who's an expert in mold. And he said, that's natural, just let it be. It's not going to
Mhm.
harm anything. It turns it a little bit orange, but it's not going to be a problem. And but she wasn't happy with that. She still didn't like orange on her mother's tombstone.
Absolutely.
Um, the third thing is that I'm on the email of a group of oceanographers in North Carolina, and one of the things that they're working on is um, restoring a local black cemetery that was used to bury slaves.
Mhm.
And they are really concerned about the history and using the cemetery and what they find as a way to expand the history of the area to include the black people as well as and the slaves as well as the white people, and they're finding that very um, useful.
That's awesome. That sounds so
Uh,
interesting.
and they have all kinds of interesting workshops on that. And the fourth thing is just experience when I was one of the reasons I'm interested in this is that when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, we were trying to, my parents were doing a family genealogy. And so we went from cemetery to cemetery. My father was from a rural community to try to find family members.
Mhm.
The grown-ups would go to the cemetery, look at the records, try to find family members. My sister and I would run through the tombstones trying to find the largest number of people that died at one time, the oldest person, the youngest person, people with unusual names. And we had at the time no sense of tragedy.
Mhm.
This was just a game to us. But it is one of my earlier memories.
I love that.
So, so thank you very much, and I really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you. It's very 19th century to be like playing in the graveyard like that as kids. People would do that all the time.
Yeah, well, and when I first met my husband, one of the things we did because we didn't have any money is we would go and walk through the graveyard. That was something you could do that didn't cost anything.
Yeah. I mean, I'd still do that now for these reasons too.
Uh, Well, and one of the really interesting ones, of course, as you know, is Halifax, where they have the graves of the people that died in the Titanic,
Yeah.
which is a really interesting historical sense.
Yeah, there I've been there once to see those graves. It's amazing.
Okay, I'll let someone else talk. I don't want to
Thank you.
monopolize you.
Robyn, I was wondering, you said that granite came in late in the 19th century, and was that a matter of available tools, or, did it just not have cachet before then? Like, what can you account for the changing types of stone? Is it pure fashion?
I think a little bit of it is fashion. And then also, yeah, I think a bit of it has to do with the tools because granite is a lot harder. It's like one of the hardest natural substances. So it's extremely hard to carve. We usually try not to do repairs on granite unless it just involves putting it back up, because like unless you have the tools for it, and you're basically a stonemason. Or you know how to work with it, like the Egyptians were doing it. But I think in North America that was maybe lost a little bit. But it did come into fashion at some point as well, and you would see the bigger monuments being made out of granite, and now that's like the most common material, for its durability, but possibly for its like accessibility as well.
And
Hello.
Thank you, Robyn. That was amazing. Really
Thank
engaging
you.
and much more than I ever would have thought. So thank you for all of that. I have two questions for you. One is, and may have missed this honestly at the beginning. Is this your private business? Like, is this something that, that's amazing. And do other people do this, or do you find yourself,
So
when
we're
you're-
the only ones in Newfoundland who do this. There's a company out of, I think, Sarnia, Memorial Restorations, that does it in Ontario. A couple people in Nova Scotia. But yeah, it's a very small, I wouldn't even call it an industry. Especially like in Newfoundland, when you want to work at these older sites, you have to also be an archaeologist. So it's very narrow. But yeah, we're the only people in the province who do it.
So I guess it would be the church or whoever would call you in, right? It's not private families as much, right?
Yeah, so it's both really. So like we've worked with parish groups, historical societies, but sometimes the families do contact us directly, and they're like, my great grandmother is in this site. Can you go work on this one individual stone? Which like is so great to do, and be able to go and just do that one thing for someone, which is really nice.
That's amazing. We've seen some cemeteries that could use your help for sure.
I would love to.
And then
I will travel.
we'll travel. Eh?
Yeah.
And the emblem behind you that you referred to, what can you tell me about that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, so this is a hex foil. My mother-in-law found us a stained glass one, so it has to sit behind me at all times. It's got like a very long origin. That's just swinging. It sort of is one of those things that was like simultaneously developed by a bunch of different places because it's a geometric thing. But like what I looked at in my book was it coming from Rome into the British Isles, and you can sort of see it in like Roman, Greek, and Greco, whatever. It was used as sort of like a protective symbol. So you'd find it on like altars, and you'd find it on like personal objects, sometimes mosaics in temples, and they brought it probably into the UK, and then you start seeing it in mortuary context, which is specifically what I was interested in. But you also see it like graffitied onto things, onto church fonts. It probably at some point became associated with the idea of the cross because it's kind of cross-like, with the six things. It's called a compass drawn design when you're looking at it as a graffiti item, because you need like a fixed arm thing to draw one. But there's also a lot of talk about how that people weren't just carrying compasses around with them. They probably with scissors, which means it was maybe made by women, because I'd have it's like a whole thing. I have book recommendations if you're interested in that. But what I was looking at it is its instances in mortuary culture. So you see it on old gravestones. You can find it on ossuary boxes from like early Jewish ossuary burials. And it has this like long history of being a symbol that people would use for protection and put over their doorways to keep evil from coming in, and like carve into their fireplaces, but also putting on personal items, which I think includes gravestones. And it happened a lot in North America, especially in like colonial New England. But also there's examples in, I haven't seen any in Ontario, but it was sort of out of use. No, that's not true. I have a butter mold.
Yes,
That has a
that's
hex foil in it.
incredible. That's right.
Yeah, that's a personal thing that it was being put on. I haven't seen them on gravestones in Ontario though. But there's examples in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia as well of them being placed on the graves. So what I was writing about was like, why? Why were they doing that? Which sort of isn't really answered, because it's a folk piece. So it's not something that people really wrote down any information about. We just have to look at the material culture that they left and do our best for us to guess.
Well, it didn't come through any particular religion.
No, so it seems to be pre-Christian. And when like early Judaism was using it, the documents are like they were just using this, but they wouldn't have been using it if it was a religious symbol. So that it must be something earlier. And it becomes kind of associated with Christianity because everyone over there, like in the UK, was Christian, so the people using it. But we do also see it particularly on medieval cross slabs, like these huge stones that were used as grave slabs. Sometimes there'll be a cross, but then instead of the top of the cross, it's a hex foil. So there is some like overlap there of how it's used, but then it's called the apotropaic mark. But you could also say that like a cross is an apotropaic mark because it's meant to protect the wearer. So same thing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you.
It's so
I
cool.
thought of one more question though. So, you obviously have a great passion for this and monuments of all kinds. And, we're looking into green burial, which often doesn't do that, right?
Mhm.
So what do you think is lost in the way of coming towards green burial that doesn't have those monuments?
I mean, I think people attach a lot of importance to being able to visit a place where the people are buried or ashes have been scattered. So I don't think it necessarily needs the gravestone. And people are using them less and less. Like my grandmother didn't have a burial place. She just had a spot. She wanted her ashes to be scattered. So I think like I don't think you're really losing much in that way because you're still gonna know where they are. But the gravestone is just this like material piece that marks it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see how it's a thread through history, and
Yeah. Like we like to think of them as artifacts, but they're also documents and like sculpture. And there's so many like threads to take off of a gravestone.
beautiful. Thank you so much for this. It was just beautiful.
Thank you.
Talking about the hex foil, one of the things I was wondering about, a year ago, I was in Kingston, New York at the Old Dutch Cemetery. And so over and over again, throughout the 1700s, like 18th century, it's the same text and really like repeats of the same symbol, often these kind of childlike angel faces, I would call it. And I wondered, and I've seen these in other places, and some of the examples you had, it's the same script, again, that sort of same image. Is it just a style that everybody was using, or was there like one carver of headstones and they were being shipped, or like what accounts for that sameness?
So I actually was in Kingston, New York last year.
Okay.
I was doing research in Sleepy Hollow and saw that it was close by. So we went through because it's one of the sites. I have a wall of Post-it notes of all my dissertation sites so I can remember what I did. It's on there. So often in communities, they would all use like the same couple gravestone carvers, which is why you see the same symbols being repeated quite often. But there also was like the stylistic trends, like everyone wanted a little winged cherub. So then you start seeing a zillion winged cherubs everywhere. And it's very likely that the carvers also had like guidebooks of like, these are the patterns I can do. Or they would just carve a bunch of blank gravestones and put whatever they wanted on it, and people would come to their shop and be like, "Oh, I like that one because my neighbor has it like that, so I want that kind." And then new carvers come along and they learn from those ones, and that's where you get the similar styles, just like continuing in the same areas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then they get like shipped somewhere else, and then those people are like, "Oh, I liked John's gravestone that he got from Massachusetts, and I'm in Halifax, so I'll get one like that made locally." And then that style just starts appearing there. You're like, it's really confusing.
Would they have been using some sort of template, or was that carving just done by hand?
They probably would have just drawn it on by hand. Yeah, it'd be cool. If they had templates, I would love to see one, but they have enough variation that they probably just like that artist style.
Robyn, thank you. I really enjoyed your talk this evening. I wanted to ask, you mentioned a book coming out. What is that book and what's it about and where will it be sold?
Yes, I think it'll be sold everywhere where books are sold, I hope. It's from Bergen Books, which is the publisher. It's out of New York. And it's more of an academic text. There's a bunch of statistics in the middle, but I tried to write in a non-academic way so that it's like interesting for people to read, minus the math chapter. But people can ignore that if they don't want to read the math chapter. It is called Daisy Wheel, Hexfoil, Hexafoil, Rosette, Protective Marks in Gravestone Art. Like the publisher changed the title slightly on me, so I was like, I have to remember what they changed it to.
Can
I
you
had
say,
it more scientific sounding.
can you say that again?
Yeah, daisy wheel, hexfoil, hexafoil with an A, rosette, and that is a reference to a painting. And if anyone can guess the painting, that'd be fun. Nothing to do with the book. The book is about yeah, these protective symbols and how they're used in mortuary culture. And then I did as a case study sort of like the first survey that's been done of them in like Northeast North America, because no one's actually looked at them in any graveyard textbooks I've ever looked at, any studies. They'll mention that they're there. They'll be like, we keep seeing these, and that's all you get. So I did a survey of them.
I can include the title and how people can order the book when we send out our follow-up emails. So
Yeah, I can send you the publisher's website for it if you want.
that'd be great. As a follow-up, do you, is part of your work, do you feel like you have a certain expertise on the symbols that are used on headstones and what they mean? Or is this particular protective symbol something that you're really keen on?
I think like knowing about the symbology comes with studying them. Like my PhD work is actually kind of funny because I'm not looking at gravestones and I'm not looking at the burials. I'm just looking at the landscape. So I'm just like often just like in a field standing around. Like this is a little bit higher than down there. I'll write that down. Which is like, so I'm like a very strange archaeologist and that I rarely look at material culture other than these rocks, and then not even in my actual research. But the hex foils I noticed when I was doing my master's, and I was like, that's weird. It's not a flower, but it's like kind of a flower. What is it? And I started researching them, and then I feel like I got sucked into not a conspiracy hole, but I'm like I see them everywhere because it's like a geometric thing, so it's going to appear everywhere. But I'm like, anytime I see one on anything, I'm like, is it symbolic?
The in that regard, I mean, in looking at the markings on gravestones, I do recommend that, you and your husband visit Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia, if you have not already.
I have not, no.
That is a fun time.
That's amazing. I
Yeah.
actually lived in Savannah, Georgia as a kid for a couple years,
Okay.
but I was like in grade 1. So I was not like out looking at some, like, I mean, I was, but I wasn't academically looking at cemeteries.
I see Judith has a question again or a comment.
Just another quick comment. I'm really proud of the symbolism on my husband's gravestone. And if you're ever in Ottawa, do let me know and I'll take you out to see it.
Absolutely. I would love that.
I was wondering too, you mentioned that, so I guess using concrete, that was something that was done within the industry that isn't an industry for a period of time, and then it was, did you come to understand that this is a really not a good idea?
Yeah, so it wasn't so much in graveyard work. That's sort of like when people are just doing it themselves.
Okay.
And they're like, oh, this fell over, I need to put it back. But in like archaeological conservation in general, like I did a year of my undergrad in England. And when I was there for school, they were like, this was like 2013, just sort of understanding the damage that had been done to historic buildings when they were putting concrete in the walls. And while I was there, I was like taking I did like a workshop on using mortar in historic buildings, and there was like just at the beginning of them understanding it. And then we went back a couple years later, and Durham Cathedral is from the 12th century, Norman sandstone cathedral. It's stunning. And they've had to replace quite a lot of the blocks in the walls because of this material falling apart, and it's sandstone. And so if it doesn't have the right air flow and like ability to wick moisture away from itself, it's going to fall apart. But when we went back like 4 years later, there was an exhibit in the cathedral about how they had like suddenly understood why this was happening, and they were trying to reverse it as much as possible and trying to like educate people about how much damage could be done by putting this like impermeable material on a historic building that needs to be able to breathe. And yeah, so it's the same thing with gravestones. And so when you see people that are like, we'll do this restoration work ourselves, but they don't have that background and like the conservation knowledge, the quickest and easiest thing and cheapest thing to do is to put it in concrete. And they're like, okay, now it's up, but without the understanding that that's going to cause damage in the long run. Yeah, it seems like the best thing to do, and like it's done with love, so I can't really be like, don't do that to these gravestones, but I also want to make sure that people know that moving forward, that's something we want to avoid.
Mm-hmm. So would you say then that this is still a particular problem because maybe it is a lot of DIY and yeah.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people that are like, yeah, out there doing their best, trying to fix gravestones. And then I come along and I'm like, why are there bolts in this? Like, why is there stainless steel rods going through, like bars on the back, and it's in concrete? And it's also very difficult to reverse concrete, which is one of the things in conservation is you want the thing to be reversible as possible, so that when new information comes along, you can fix what you did before and take it down and put it back. With epoxy, that's not so possible because epoxy doesn't come apart. But you can sort of like chip it off the stone. But to remove concrete without damaging a softer stone it's not impossible, but it's extremely time consuming, and it won't happen without some of the stone coming with it, unfortunately. So once it's stuck in there, there's not too much I can do, unfortunately.
Well, important work. I know everybody gathered here certainly would
Thank you.
is very pleased that you're doing this and appreciate the education aspect as well that you're offering.
We do like workshops with community groups sometimes, like heritage groups will have us out to teach their like summer staff how to clean the graveyards or something like that. So we'll go out and like make sure that they're doing it without gonna cause more damage in the future, and we'll like help them reset some stones to level. We usually don't recommend that people who don't have bunch of training like do the break resetting, just because it involves like epoxies and that kind of thing, and mortars. But like if a gravestone's just leaning and it needs to be cleaned, like we'll go out and train people and make sure that that's like they're able to do that safely.
Any other questions or comments? That was a lot of information that I was like, I had no idea. And I'm a bit of a nerd about graveyards and cemeteries. So
That's what I'm here for.
yeah, I really appreciate it. And especially for those that are listening in the future, I'll do now what I should have at the start, which is to say I'm Kelly and I'm part of Community Death Care Ottawa. And if you want to find out more about events that are happening, you can come to our website, communitydeathcareottawa.com. And yeah, if you want to get a hold of Robyn, if you have follow-up questions, let me know. You'll have had our email address because that's how we send you the Zoom link. But yeah, I'm very excited to read your book.
Thank you.
And then go visit more cemeteries this summer.
I'm also a couple of weeks ago, I signed a contract with Boulder Books, that is a Newfoundland publisher, and I'm going to be doing like sort of a travel-ish guide to historic cemeteries in Eastern Newfoundland. So that's on the docket for coming out in 2026. So it's a little ways away, but it's hopefully it'll encourage people to come visit some interesting parts of the province.
Fantastic. What's the oldest cemetery that you either know of or have been to in Newfoundland?
Newfoundland. The oldest gravestones are in Fairland at the Colony of Avalon Museum, and they are from the 1620s. They were because it's part of my master's thesis, made of a local slate. So we did portable XRF analysis on slate that was used on roofing tiles at the site, on the gravestones, and then from a local slate outcrop. So yeah, they were made of a local slate, which was really cool. They had like Welsh slaters at that site, which makes them the oldest British gravestones that are currently known about that were carved in North America.
Hey.
Unfortunately, we do not know where the graves are, but we have the stones.
Oh, okay. How does that, were they, because they had fallen, or is that
They
why?
are very broken. There's one in two pieces. It's like this big and like that, and the other one's quite large. But they're slate, which is quite a durable material, and they're shattered. So the thought is, me and my supervisor, who's the lead archaeologist at that excavation, which is an ongoing excavation people can visit if they're in the province. And our thought was that the first guy who founded this settlement, George Calvert, was like a secret Catholic. He was Catholic, and then his family became Anglican because England became Anglican. And then he became Catholic again. So the idea is like he probably was Catholic the whole time, at least a little bit. And the next people who came were super royalist, super Anglican. And we're like, the gravestones were found in a layer from the 1630s, but nowhere near any graves. One of them was in a ditch, but they were found in this layer, but they would have been earlier because they're broken and they'd fallen in there. So we're like, did the second guy break them on purpose because he was trying to remove this like Catholic element from the site, because he wrote about hating them a lot? So there's possibly some conspiracies. I did check the second guy's house foundation for graves, because we're like, would he have been that terrible? But no, he was not that terrible. There are no graves under his house.
But nothing from the Vikings?
No, so as far as I'm aware, there are no Viking burials at Lansdowne Meadows. They were only there for just under 20 years. It was a very temporary settlement. So like if somebody died, we don't know where they are.
I think the the idea that maybe it was the second on the scene that potentially damaged the gravestones or threw them in the ditch. And I'm just thinking about, I know other examples of essentially hate crimes where people will go into cemeteries and deliberately damage headstones of certain groups.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about, this is some of why this is so interesting, that where our dead rest, it's a powerful story that continues, that's very alive for those of us that are left behind, as it were.
Absolutely. It's very like placemaking, and then another group comes in and they're like, I'll just erase you. We'll get out of here. And that's, yeah, when you start finding that out, it's very like, whoa.
Yeah. It's got quite a charge to it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Robyn.
Thank you.
It was just fascinating, delightful, and I so appreciate your enthusiasm for this work. I know, I'm currently just a few blocks from a local cemetery, and I suspect in the next few days I'll be out there having a look. And
Fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I wish it was. It's not light anymore. It's 10 p.m. here.
Yeah.
If I could show you the view, we live on a street with a historic church, and the church is from the early 1900s, but the graves beside it are from the early 1800s. So I can see graves from my window, which is great.
Yeah, great neighbors.
So it's fantastic. Very quiet.
Yeah. Thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining us. We will, of course, be sending out the recording so you can watch again. And if there's any materials that you want to share, Robyn, we will, of course, send out info on your book. But yeah, this was great. Really like a fun way to spend a Friday evening for me.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'll send you all the information and everything.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.